Barb is muted.
Nope.
Not yet.
Not yet. All right.
Where did you get your suit?
Oh, that suit from the opening, that was my one foray into fashion design. I designed it and got it made while I was studying abroad in Beijing in 2015. And it's been my go-to opening suit.
Very nice.
Although at this point, yeah, I need to go back and get 5 more so I have some variety.
I like.
Yeah, I really should have gotten a designed eye patch while I was around. I will regret that for a while.
It's not too late, by the way. I know the master seamstress.
Definitely, yeah. Honestly, it's time for a commission. Training. Cool. Anything else? And feel free, as always, jump in whenever. We're pretty informal here, just running through things. If not, I can just sort of jump right in. We're going to talk about more or less these pieces. I believe this is actually Sashi's shot class now.
Ooh.
Indeed, there are still some available. I'll just bring this right up close so we get a nice detail shot. This is a series of blue and white wares that I've been making using these like accreted, built-up slip tendrils. I'll just get in real close. You can see each of these tendrils is built out of multiple sort of round nodes, and each of those nodes are a single brush stroke or a single brush deposit of this slip. And this is on basically a white slip with a porcelain clay body and a glossy white glaze. And then I spray it from underneath with a blue china paint, basically a cobalt and lead that's fired at about 1300 degrees. So the blue doesn't disrupt the glaze once it's fired another time. So there are a bunch of different sort of similar in this vein slips that I use. And they're not, frankly, they're not really slips. These glazes have about 5% clay, but I treat them as slips. This is a very similar recipe, but it has some silicon carbide in it, so it inflates. So it's built up in those same tendrils, but they just sort of puff up. This is a similar recipe to the green one, just with an orange mason stain and individual blobs instead of multiple blobs built up and sort of congealing together as they melt with a white non-inflatable blob on the tip.
Max, do we ask you questions as you're speaking, or do you want to wait?
Please. Yeah, as they come, hot off the head.
So I use glazes with silicon carbide, but in that example that you showed, did you say that you added the silicon carbide to the slip?
More or less, although again, it's not really slip because there's only 5% clay. It's mostly glass formers. It's more or less an under-fired glaze that I can build with. And unfortunately, I'm not really going to give you guys the recipe.
No, I don't want recipes because my idea is, I want to experiment myself, but what I see in your piece is that when I use glaze with silicon carbide, I don't have any control on where the bubbles are formed. And
Right.
Your piece looks like you just put a blob and inflated, but it's not, they're very, so you put more clay in the glaze and then add silicon carbide?
Essentially, yeah.
I just wanted.
Essentially, yes. And there are a ton of different varieties. Silicon carbide, for those of you that don't know, it's a really high temperature refractory material. So like the gas kiln shelves are made of silicon carbide that's bonded together with who knows what. And it's fired, those shelves are fired at like or 3,500 degrees Fahrenheit, so they're astoundingly durable. But if you've ever had glaze that drips onto the shelf, you'll notice it becomes a volcano glaze because the silicon carbide constantly produces carbon dioxide during the firings. So for our purposes, as an addition into glazes, it will literally just, when used in the right recipe, it'll literally just inflate, trapping CO2 into a glazed matrix. You guys may be pretty familiar with volcanic glazes, which instead of being trapped, they sort of burst and bubble and look all pockmarked. These I've been investigating more or less serious matte glazes that use silicon carbide. I say serious mattes because the reason that these aren't bursting is because there's a layer of matte crystals on the surface. The reason matte glazes are matte is because they form silica and alumina crystals on the top that make a matted surface. And it's actually a stiff layer of glass during the firing. So that stiffness on the surface allows the carbon dioxide to be trapped and create those inflated forms. This is kind of a cross section. You know, this one is incredibly fragile, but very crusty. So this is just kind of some of my test tiles that I'm still processing. So that, it's, I don't know, you can do experiments with silicon carbide. It's really an amazing material. I feel like I'm just sort of scratching the surface on what can be done with it. You know, sorry.
Oh my God,
no problem.
this one's pretty interesting.
So this one inflated a lot and then deflated later, but you can see it has a foamy structure on the inside, really pretty dermatological on the surface, like some kind of skin disease, which is kind of fun.
So what made it so the glaze that just form bubbles but don't pop? Is there a specific?
Just tweaking the recipe right. Matte glazes will be able to contain it better than glossy glazes. Glossy glazes will be more fluid. They'll be a more liquid glass. So bubbles will just come to the surface. But the layer of matte crystals that's forming as the kiln is firing will be able to stiffen and trap all that released gas. And
what makes, is there an ingredient or a number of ingredients that make a glaze to be matte? Is it less silica and more clay, or?
Exactly, less silica and more alumina. So clays are a main source of alumina. Alumina is more or less the refractory meaning something that doesn't melt. Like kiln bricks are really refractory. Clay, though, has both silica and alumina, so adding more clay will introduce more silica as well. So you have to, yeah, glaze chemistry is really a serious balancing act. To raise the alumina levels, you have to pull away things that are giving you silica, like feldspars, which are also a good source of alumina. So you just have to kind of juggle things. I can post a link to a UMF calculator where you can plug in your recipes and get the chemical breakdown of like how much alumina you have. There are these great maps, the Stull map, that you can map out where a glaze falls based on the chemical components, whether it's going to be glossy or whether it's going to be matte. So those are some really useful things. I have to admit, these I just sort of developed blind, like without those maps. I started making things like, well, maybe this is the easiest one. So these are little globules that are pretty well melted. You know, they're semi-glossy and they have great surface tension, so they just sort of sit in themselves like little yellow droplets. And from there, I did experiments adding silicon carbide. Some of them didn't work. Some of them were a little too foamy. They were actually popping and whatnot. So I tried to adjust the recipe with more clay or changing the firing temperature and whatnot.
So were you using the Scott kilns in the community center to test all this? Was it the Scott's at the?
More or less. These I started doing at the Mendocino Art Center the first time my retina detached, because I basically couldn't lift anything, but I could lift shot glasses and I could lift small little test containers of glaze. So I can just sort of show you guys how I build them as well.
So Max, how full was the kiln? How full was your kiln? It was an electric kiln. Was it pretty empty?
Why? Why are you asking?
Why? Because I mean, I fire jewelry in my Scott, which is the size of a trash can. So I'm just curious.
So I fell in love with this really teeny test kiln. The shelves were smaller than this board in front of me. So it was probably, I don't know, 9 inches by 9 inches. It was great. You know, I could put in 4 shot glasses, or I could put in 9 test tiles, or 1 shot glass and 6 test tiles. It was great. You know, I could fire it to cone 6 twice a day, which is really addictive. Quite fun. You can just get, you know, results super fast and develop things at a better pace than you're doing it in a gas kiln where you have to make a bunch of tests and then wait 3 days.
Yeah.
Then it comes out and I don't know, you've already moved on to something else.
Yeah, and I'm not asking you to do it in Sonoma, but since I do have my own Scott, not that I think I want to go down this road, but I'm just saying if it's even possible for me at home.
Yeah, I mean, I'm heavily pro, you know, test tiles and testing these things. It's great. You can fire kilns very empty. You know, it's a little wasteful because there's energy. Electric kilns certainly less so than gas kilns. But yeah, they're easy to slip in around things as well. There's always space for test tiles. So especially in these communal kilns, you know, you can get stuff processed quite quick. Oh, this is actually kind of out of left field as well. Here, you can see the difference between these blobs on a clay surface on the bottom, where they're not really melting; they're just maintaining their droplet form, and then on a glass surface where they diffuse into the liquid glass and sort of run, yeah, bleed out a little bit.
So it's the same material, it just one of them goes on a glassy surface and one not?
Yeah, just an interaction. Yeah, showing some interaction.
Are all the yellow dots the same material?
They are very slightly different recipes. These two, go and put a close up. So you can see this one, it's all droplets. They're quite round, and this one you can see there actually are nodules. So it's not melting as much. It's basically maintaining the same form that it goes into the kiln as. And that comes down to, you know, tweaking a material, one of the frits, some of the fluxes are things that melt, tweaking that from a percentage of like 5% to 7 to 8%. So some of these are very touchy in that way. And as with anything else, you know, you just have to run a bunch of tests, figure out what the variables are, whether thickness or kiln load or kiln temperature. You know, if they're melting too much, try firing a cone lower. Or you can go back in and tweak the recipe. Just depends on what kind of arsenal you have. If you have a nice raw material lab or run of the kilns, all can be tweaked. And Caleb Rocco, good morning. These are all fired to cone 6.
5 to 7% is the silicon carbide?
One of the frits in this. The silicon carbide, you really don't need much to start the effect. I have some glazes where I use 0.25%, and I have some glazes where I use 18%. So it's really a range. And you can take a glaze and make 10 little batches of it and do a run, you know, 0.25%, 1%, 4%, 8%, 15%. 30%, you know, just to get a gist of how it's behaving with glaze. And that's really the best way to develop these things, is try and be systematic, really dig into what individual materials are doing, or you can be systematic in the temperature, you know, fire 1 to cone 3, 1 to cone 4, 1 to cone 5, 1 to cone 6. Yeah, a lot of ways to fool around. Well, I'll just do some live gooping. I have to admit, it's incredibly fun. It's kind of a really addictive, slow-paced activity, perfect for quarantining. So let's see. And this does dovetail into our conversation about the flocculants and deflocculants, because the quality of the liquid mixture is really pretty essential to how it behaves. So you can see it's very thick, a little too thick. And I find this glaze to be so temperamental. I literally add water by, you know, like 10 droplets at a time or what have you, just to really hone it into where I want. And I've sort of gotten to know the amount of water that I like. You can add it really thick. Actually, yeah, somebody who I have not given their fair due, but has been incredibly influential on me is Takuro Kuwata. If any of you guys know him, he's this radical Japanese potter making like insane pop teaware. And he would take, you know, like fistfuls of more or less this glaze and slap it on the tea bowl, and you get these. I should post some images of him. Takuro, T-A-K-U-R-O, Takuro, and then Kuwata, K-U-W-A-T-A, Kuwata. He's awesome. A total rock star right now. Frank, yeah, I think he's a genius and a revolutionary, and someone to keep an eye on.
Oh yeah, I've seen his pieces. With the fog there, I think.
Yeah, he's no joke. Big deal. Well deserved acclaim. So now you can see. Trying to get you. So it's, you know, really quite thick, but still fluid enough where it'll give you those nice fat drips. Yes. Yeah, this is working at a miniature scale is quite fun. It's really intimate in a certain way. You know, I spend like hours with my nose a couple inches away from this thing. Going in from up close. And the type of brush that you use is also pretty important. I have to admit, you kind of like.
Do you need me to go wash it for you?
No, the white is actually integrates pretty well. Just a little bit of effects. Yeah. Oop. I'm not too sure. So I just go around and literally lay on glob jewels. Take a loaded brush and just kind of shake them out drop by drop. You can see, well, let's see, try and get in focus here. You can see they actually kind of want to ball up. Frankly, I have no idea why that is.
Actually, can you back it up maybe a couple inches? This is not quite in focus, so that's okay.
Is that's a little. where my pen is.
I think it has, what's the recipe? Or no, you're not telling. That's right?
It doesn't, but it does have some like sodium deflocculants, or flocculants rather. And it is high silica. It kind of behaves similar to like sand. If you've ever built sand castles, you know, there's like a similar process where you like, this actually has some water on the brush that is disrupting my flow. But really, like, this is the ultimate persnickety use of water, like keeping track of water content and how clay particles behave.
Is that cup that you're holding already glazed?
It's just bisque, so it's a raw terracotta. And when they're fired, I'm actually using this same glaze. So this is a semi-inflatable orange. One thing to keep in mind with silicon carbide, since it is gray, when you use it in high amounts, it will tint the glaze that you're using, basically turn it gray if you use too much, which can be fairly unpleasant. But in small amounts or with the right colorants, you get a nice, still a strong reaction. And so I just go around and do a first layer, you know, just like plopping these on at random more or less. One thing I like, I believe Takaru Kawada uses like a slip trailer or a dropper to control the size that he uses. I really like using brushes just because I can switch the size of them. You know, make these two rather small drops on top, and then you can get fairly large as well. Actually, there is a fair amount of water in these because some of them are collapsing. It's really fun. Just like nice thing to listen to podcasts to or zone out. And you can, once I have my first layer built up, I can go back and again, I mean, the brushwork is really kind of the most fun part because you just like, you can shake out little drops on it with the right wiggly brush. But it's a really thirsty glaze, high silica glazes, fritted glazes. They'll dry really quick as opposed to high clay glazes. If you've ever like dipped something in a Shino really thick, you'll know it takes a long time to dry out. It is a shame, yeah, that is definitely fuzzy. But you can build these up like snowmen. You know, right now there are like two sections.
That's nice and clear. Like once you stabilize, that helps with the clarity. If that's what you were talking about.
Okay.
Yeah. I just want to say welcome to Miriam. She's a new student that just joined us and touching onto the tail end. So Miriam, this is Max, and I'm Kayla. I'm the director of the program here, and feel free to ask questions directly, or you can write them to me in the chat, and I'll ask them when it's convenient.
Welcome.
Hello.
So it is basically as simple as that. All the labor involved is, you know, tweaking the recipe and having the patience to sit here and build these up. I will say, like, the blue and white wares, these do shrink a fair amount in the firing when they don't have the inflatable glazes. So these forms are fired multiple times. And you can see some of these tendrils have like eight nodes to them. Some of them branch off. I basically fire them to like saving a Word document or something. I can sort of freeze my progress. when you build that far out, they become incredibly fragile, and occasionally, like working in a miniature forest, I'll accidentally break off one of them and it will cascade down and break off, 7 of these other tendrils, and I'll be there weeping and nobody will know what's going on. Just these like micro tragedies that no one can relate to. So that's why I like to fire them multiple times. Again, with the test kiln, it's great. Like I can just at the end of the day, throw them in there and fire them to cone 5, cone 6, and come back the next morning and they'll be ready for another layer.
So Max, can you just briefly go over again the components of the material you're using?
Yeah, I'd say, yeah, mostly it's a high glass former glaze that I'm using as a slip. So the glass formers aren't exactly melting completely, but it is semi-glossy. So it's basically an under-fired glaze, and you can try this with all sorts of other glazes. I actually have, like you don't have to have a stiff glaze in order to make it appear like that. So this vase right here that I made a little while ago, I deposited the same sort of large little globules of a high copper glaze, 3 nodes of that, and then 1 node of this cobalt blue. You can see it's like a high alumina satin matte, so the copper sort of bled out, and it was in reduction, so you got some of that copper red action going. But it's a nice way to play with glaze. A glaze that's really thick will always melt out more. So you can, like Sansai ware, if you're familiar with that, you can add a really thick area of copper or what have you and have it melting down and diffusing. Application. Any, well, yeah, so there's not much clay. Again, if there is more clay, it'll behave more like a slip. It'll take a lot longer to dry. It'll be a little bit less, more fragile rather. And it won't drop off the brush in the same way. Like this is the perfect fluidity, the perfect thixopatry, to use a strange vocabulary. But I invite you guys to just try poke around, test some recipes, test glazes thick as well, see what they do.
And I'll just plug the ceramic materials workshop class, because it's a class that you've been taking for a while, and we're going to be offering it through our center, but it's with Matt and Rose Katz, who are the ceramics materials workshop, and it's a great place to start experimenting with glaze in like a guided format, online format. And you can probably talk a little bit more about the format if you'd like.
It's awesome. It feels honestly kind of cultish. We have weekly, or I guess every other week, there's a Zoom meeting with him, and so everyone's there, and you can talk about the projects you're doing. There's a nonstop, basically like our Facebook group, where everyone has a page that they can post the results of what they're working on, and Matt will comment on it. And then during the Zoom meetings, he can really dig in and explain what's going on, show you some directions or help you out with the directions that you're interested in going in. He and his wife, Rose and Matt Katz, they're just brilliant glaze designers. We've been talking again about industrial standards. So if a glaze is flawed in say like a Chinaware factory making diner plates, if a glaze is flawed, and 30,000 diner plates have food safety issues, there are huge lawsuits on the line. So their chemistry is really, really tight. For example, like a lot of dinerware mugs and plates have lead glazes. Lead is generally not safe to work with, but if your chemistry is right, it's great. It's fine. It's a great material. Don't use lead. Don't use lead at all. You shouldn't phrase it like that. They're professionals. But you really have to know your stuff to work in industry, and both of them do and have So they're, they know what's
How about their clay online class?
I haven't taken
Recommend
it.
that.
I would, just by knowing them. I haven't taken it personally, but knowing the standards that they keep themselves at with the glaze class, I know it'd be worth it as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think knowing about geology and origins of your clay gives you a deeper understanding of glaze too, because they're not independent from each other when you're talking about glaze results. Yeah.
So Kayla, can we take that one through the Sonoma Community Center
Yeah.
also?
Yep, well, it's actually through them, but they're doing a fundraising initiative with nonprofits. So they're letting us list their class at a discounted rate. So basically they're the instructors and we're the platform, I guess, in which they get your emails. So they give us a cut of your registration, which is pretty cool.
Okay.
So it's actually a fundraiser for us. It's the same exact class that they offer the rest of the public.
So do we sign through your website or through their website?
Through us, yeah. And I can let you know when we have that available.
Okay.
Terrific.
The class starts on July 1st.
Oh,
It does?
Yes.
July 1st and October 1st is the next round.
Is anyone going to take it July 1st or are you waiting for October?
I would like to start the July one.
Okay.
That's kind of why I asked, should I take the clay online first and then the glaze, or does it matter?
I would just follow, which one you're more interested in. There's not really a chronology. They do have a beginner glaze chemistry and an advanced section. But they don't let first time students into the second level. They're both great though. Yeah, you'd have a blast. And I feel like I'm drowning in information. They'll like release a 2-hour lecture and I'll need to go, into the forest, into the mountains and meditate on it for months. There's just so much information and it's so accurate too. I feel like one of the main issues with learning about glazes is you pick up information, like one tidbit from one book and then you hear something from somebody in the studio and then you hear another book and they're all conflicting and nothing makes sense. But they really have a centralized, a huge database of information. He's going to write a glaze chemistry Bible one of these days and I think break the ceramic world in half. So I'm looking forward to that. And one of these days.
How similar was it to the classes you took at Alfred, like the glaze classes? Is it very similar?
I'm in kind of a weird position because I actually took a class with him at Alfred. We were neighbors in Alfred. So very similar. Although I have to say, virtual classes are a little weird. Ours obviously is fantastic. His infrastructure for virtual classes is fantastic. He's been doing these, I think, for at least 2 years, and they have ironed out all the kinks. There are weekly lectures released. You have your ongoing personal page. They're great about responding to people's questions. Can't recommend it more. If you want to learn about glazes, it's the best way to do it.
Yeah, so Kayla, I'm interested also.
Okay, yeah, we can make it happen. I have the material, I just haven't gotten it online. But yeah, I took his class as a graduate student at Alfred as well, and I was his TA for the glaze chemistry class. So yeah, I had a little bit, and I had to fire all the tests for all the students, so that was part of the assistantship. But
he's also very good humored as well. He has a great supply of glaze-related puns. Keep things light. He also, while working in industry, since he's worked at Alfred, and I believe he has a BFA, he understands. We're not chemists necessarily. We don't come from like science backgrounds, so it is formatted for artists, for ceramists. When he brings up the periodic table, he makes sure everybody stay calm. Don't worry. We're going to talk about valences. It's okay. You don't have to. Hide your screens or what have you. It's all very well put together. Decipherable as well. You don't need some chemistry background. Let's see. Well, I'm just going to start, I'll do that brief horizontal coiling demo, but feel free, we can just keep chatting.
Just to catch Miriam up a little bit, Friday is the glaze shop talk with Max. So if you have any questions to ask ahead of time, I did send you guys a link to a Google Doc to submit your questions ahead of time, because you get priority over the questions if you submit them ahead of time. So feel free to do that. And I'll get that to you too, Miriam. Or you can ask here and he'll remember it for Friday.
Yes.
I'll record
it. So just a little introduction to what I'll be doing. You can keep talking. I'm just going to make a small rectangular form, and then we'll do some folding work on the walls. But I'm just making a quick, unsophisticated slab, squishing it down to make the bottom nice and flat. Keep it at the width of this board. And then we'll do the usual coils. Nothing too special. And Ruth, I'll try and, if we have time at the end of class, I'll try and do a miniature version of that purple piece. Or if there's enough dialogue here, maybe I'll be able to just whip one of those out. I have to say though, I do feel like the techniques have been covered. Like that purple piece is all coiled and well, I'll just say I'll try and get to it at the end there.
Thanks, I'll appreciate it.
I like that piece a lot. That was definitely a favorite of mine.
You know how there have been research about how different people learn differently. So some people need to touch, some people need to see, some people need to hear. I can read forever directions, and it's not going to help. I need to actually see. So
I'm totally there with you. I'm a total visual learner. Even like with the glaze chemistry, I really need to do the tests myself. You know, the whole way through, be able to like register how much water is in something. You know, like visually, and yeah. So again, coiling 101, just really quick, sloppy coils, but precise joinery, making sure they're really well wedged in there. Not wedged, going around, blending them together, making them forget that they're two separate things.
This just in, I looked back at my correspondence with Matt, and he said the start date is anytime. So I think this is for, they're pre-recorded. I'll have to look a little deeper, but yeah, it's a start anytime. So I wanted to start a little bit later, just so we have more time to market it. But I'll get the details about what the difference is between what starts in July.
Kayla, I think the July one is an actual interactive one where you can bring your test tiles in.
Yeah.
Which we can't do here, obviously, and then otherwise it's virtual, which you can do anytime.
Yeah.
The July 1st one is his normal class, and honestly, I think the advancing and the beginning glaze ones have filled up for that. But those are virtual as well. They've stopped doing in-person workshops with the whole thing, the whole virus thing. The clay bodies class, I do believe has space open. But yeah, I would assume if that's the case, that what we would be signing up for would be all of the pre-recorded lectures, which, as I mentioned earlier, it really is an infinite amount of information, and centralized as well. Like it's infinitely more convenient to get information from the same trustworthy source that's, you know, continuous and cohesive.
Sorry, I stepped out, so I didn't hear. There is no more space class in the July 1st. Is that what you said?
I believe there are 25 spots in the July 1st beginner and advancing glazes class. And I believe I saw him post on Instagram that those were both full, but that there are spaces in the clay bodies class. Hunger is growing for those classes of his. I think people are waking up to how, you know, fundamentally useful that sort of stuff is, being able to figure out a surface that you really can work with.
We will be able to offer glaze of our lives, understanding glazes for the beginner. We will also be able to offer the middle glazes, it's mid-temperature, and then glazed and confused, which is understanding the UMF formula.
Shameless with those puns.
Yeah, so we take the registration and transfer funds to him. So they are the classes that are
With
pre-recorded.
Okay.
Yeah. And they're gonna be around $100.
And you know, I signed up for a $500 class. I do not have very much money, but a $500 class over 3 months, and with the amount of time that I spend making glazes, one of his lectures could easily save me 100 hours of frustration and suffering, and that, you know, it just pays for itself over and over. Let alone developing, you know, surfaces that also pay themselves over.
Okay.
Let's see. This is interesting. I've owed my friend a butter dish for like the last 2 years. He keeps hounding me. This is actually probably about butter, the size of a stick of butter.
It's bigger, for sure.
Bigger. We'll need some area for the lid. Maybe I'll close this off now. This will be the base. Well, I feel so bad. I'm always like, I'll make it this next residency. And I'm leaving in a couple of days. Maybe fast track this one. It's definitely longer. What else? Yeah, if you have some show and tell, feel free to pop in. Like those pieces, Barb, you posted that asparagus dish. Quite lovely. Nice undulating rim.
Yeah, now I'm curious how you made the one that the picture Ruth posted, where, because with the pot that you threw last week, it was all thrown and then vertical folds.
Right.
So I basically started with that dish upside down and started stretching the clay and then just kind of squashed it all together and flipped it over. So that's
Awesome.
just how. So I figured maybe I should wait for the demo, but I kind of thought, well, I'll just try it this way. It worked.
Yeah,
I had a form in there. I had a slump mold in there when I squashed it all together, and then I flipped it over.
Nice. Yeah, some strategic supports are definitely useful. I have to admit, like the horizontal folds on a vertical form are kind of the most straightforward, just because you know, you can use gravity a lot to your advantage, and the weight will support itself. Whereas the vertical folds, you really have to accordion the form a little bit more aggressively. I actually really do like that. It's kind of interesting. And we'll finish that one up today as well.
Good.
Let's see. Yeah, thanks for, I believe that was your recommendation to play with that one. Thank you. Like a choose your own adventure class. So again, just, you know, supporting the walls and using my poor thumb to squish everything together. Just making sure there are no joinery lines left over. This clay is a little, well, this clay is actually very gritty. This is my personal reclaim mix. So it may split a little bit more than the terracotta body, which I've been demoing with in the past. But we'll just deal with that as it comes. I'll show you, I'll point that out as it happens. Some things that groggy bodies, you know, I won't be able to smooth this out to the same extent just with ribs, just because of the coarseness of the grit. But the sponge cleanup technique will still get me to a smooth, homogeneous surface at the end. So I'm just doing a little in-progress cleanup. It's fairly thick, about as thick as that rim there. You know, easily finger thickness. I'm just gonna flabulate one side. I'll get one more coil in there. And this is a butter dish, so it kind of fits like an omen, a flabby omen to mind your butter consumption. Or not. Make this coil a little bit more of a dog bone to bring up these edges. That sort of technique, I'm joining with one hand and squeezing the top half with the other, kind of thinning it out as I join it. Just to expedite in the process, using these two devices we've been using. I'm going to finish those, or bring that edge back, just so it has a little bit more support. Yeah, Matt Katz is great. I'm just thinking about the slip demo I gave, and in his slip talk, he had some horrible attempt at the pun. You know, he was talking about trying to get slips to really adhere to a body. And it was something like, if the slip doesn't fit, then you must equip the use of that slip. Just something like cringe worthy.
It's like dad jokes or something, but in clay.
It's great. I don't know, I was howling with laughter. All right, so we have this nice little wall, a little uneven and sloppy and whatnot, but that's all right. We're just gonna distort it more, so may as well lean in that direction. Just trying to make sure I don't have any open edges, because those, when you do stretch it, if there is a crease, if there is like a joinery line that hasn't been fully blended, it'll easily just pop open when you squish it, belly it out from the inside. So that is, don't give it any, show no weakness, I guess. I'm gonna grab a sponge. Some other people, since it does seem like this class is interested in these flabby things, some of the people that you should look at, some masters of flabby wobbly elements. I posted Jason Briggs in one of those Facebook posts. I think maybe with Shelley's piece. He's really quite impressive. I believe he does all carved flabs as well. He does a lot of like really in-your-face bodily elements. They're all really dense porcelain, some of them with like needle holes that he then glues hair back in, and they're really pretty alarming. Kathy Butterly is also one to know. She uses a lot of slip cast forms, which she then distorts. She's a master of multi-firing as well. A lot of her pieces she just fires until she likes them, adding little bits of clay and glaze.
Should I do a screen share?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. They're so cool.
And these are quite small typically, right? Like 6 inches.
Maximum size, yeah. Everything is really intimate. Ken Price's later work as well. He does a lot of those big unctuous drips and folds and things like that. Do you know, are you familiar with this guy? Mm-hmm. Yeah, we stumbled upon each other's work and had like a really fun conversation one evening. He's quite a nice guy.
I've never met him.
He's in
Arkansas,
yeah, somewhere in the Midwest. Can't quite remember. Half of me feels like it'd be fun to go there and work with him, but things would probably get too weird. All right, well, let's see.
Who did you say Ken Price?
Oh, yeah. And we've shown, like, in the cleanup, I mean, he's just the master of all these things. I made some of these toroids in school with those orifices, and then I saw that he had been doing that as well, and I was like, oh, man. Shites, I thought I had made something pricey and that he hadn't, but he's done it all. He's really another really prolific maker. He's really explored that vocabulary, taking it around town. So right now, I'm just smoothing out the surface, just pressing in lightly with some support on the with some support on the back, bracing it, getting rid of some of these rib lines and where the grog has sort of scratched into it. And while I'm doing that, I'm also stretching the clay and thinning it out and weakening it with the water application as well. But just, doting on it, slowly getting it into place. Maybe I'll do more aggressive stretching there, getting into it. You can see it responds quite differently than the sandy clay. The grog here is quite large. Really bad at scale references.
The pieces that you have in Instagram with folds, like the vertical ones, are they done with a groggy clay?
Like the one that you had posted, that sort of purplish reddish piece. That one was done with the groggy clay. Not this groggy. I have to admit, this has been kind of a recent recent love, this like extra groggy clay.
To me, that looks like Celtic sea salt, the gray Celtic sea salt.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's something I really need to work on. Yeah, she's a pro.
I think salts, when you talk about grog, salt is a really good reference, different grades of salts.
Definitely. Jeez. Yeah, I don't even know, like the official size, I think it's the 18 to 35 mesh grog, something like that.
Which is like a window screen, approximately. You think about that?
Oh, huh.
Yeah. I think.
So are you already starting the folding process there?
Slowly. So you can see, you know, the general cleanup thing that I'm doing, I'm gently pressing in and just slowly weakening, slowly stretching, and slowly digging into the clay. I'll try and get some good lighting here. You can see it's, you know, we're starting to get some of the canyons forming. So I'll do the indents first from the outside, and then we'll go in from the inside and build up those ridges. Trying to keep it fairly horizontal, just to be straightforward. I'm not sure. Maybe I'll just contain it in the rectangular format. I won't have it wrap around the edges at all. I don't know. What do you guys think? I like to choose your own adventure. It sounds fun. Slowly working it out. Just pressing, using my hands on the other side to give it kind of an area to rest into or be stretched against. So there is kind of a molding going on. And it's getting fairly thin in some places, which is great. That'll collapse quite nicely. Now that it's getting quite thin, it's becoming even more responsive. It's getting thin and wet. And
Could we see the other side of that, just since it's open? Okay.
And it's kind of arcing out enough, and I'll basically be compressing it down to a slight angle and get this to go back, sort of straighten out and make sure it doesn't like flare out too much. I find the flaps just really fun. Like they always do unexpected things. I'm sure I could control them more if I were so inclined, but I like the freshness, the sort of spontaneity that this approach gives. So I'm just going to come in from the other side as well. And honestly, I'm not even going to use water. Just use my finger and slowly work it out. Try and squeeze the bottom out as well. And give it I want this to look pretty gravity bound. So having a nice like plump edge there.
I didn't understand what you said. What is it that you wanted?
I want it to sit really heavily.
Okay.
So if you think of like, let's see if I can.
You said plump.
Yeah. If you
Good word.
you know, I just like plop that down, and gravity is.
Got it.
Yeah, I want it to be gravity bound, earth bound. Make it look like it's sort of sagging into the surface there. Cool. Since the horizontal ones really are more in that vein, more gravity bound, more pressure from above. And just for the record, I'm keeping the top edge pretty darn thick. It started to thin out a little bit too much there, but that top edge is going to provide me structure, something to press down on. If it were really thin, it'd be really hard to press down on it without just warping that top. But if it's thick there, that pressure will be exerted in the weak spots that I'm building out. So again, just sort of pulling these out from the inside. You'll see some areas like, right there. That was probably about where a coil was. Maybe that was bad joinery. Maybe it's just that this clay is so groggy that it's going to split naturally when it's stretched from the other side with no support. So you can see we have vaguely flabby forms forming, but there's no creases yet. And the creases are really my favorite part. You know, it's like a linear, or you're getting a sharp line on something that's soft and round. It's quite pleasant. But just to repair that little burst, you know, no problem. Trusty sponge.
Should I show a screenshot of the piece that was referenced to prompt this demo?
Oh, sure.
Just for those who didn't see it.
It's definitely like right in line. That is on my mind. Ugh.
All right, so.
And this would basically be that bottom section. I would build that bottom section, flabulate it, and then let that top edge stiffen up for, you know, a couple hours or a day, depending on local temperature and humidity and how much I had it covered. And then I'd go back in and do the same thing on the top level.
Did you do any carving at all on that piece?
That I don't believe so. I think that's all wet work. Wasn't until a little bit later when I started doing the fabric studies that I really got into playing around with carving and wet work. It's really nice to have both of those options, because with the wet work, you kind of, like, once you squish it, that's kind of all you got. But if you carve it as well, you know, you go back in there and refine all sorts of elements.
There's a lot of
higher resolution.
It's amazing you were able to get that.
Wait, sorry, I missed that.
There were a lot of sharp creases there. It's amazing you were able to get that all through
Thanks. So some of those, let's see, we may have some of those appear in this one. So I'll just point them out if they occur.
So on that piece that we had the picture on, you created a bottom like this, and then you built with coils again and created the front of the other part?
Exactly.
Or was it, okay. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so it's all built in you know, a monolithic structure, just giving it time between the collapse and putting on that other layer.
And do you ever use like a heating gun or an air dryer or something to speed up the process?
I do try and avoid it, frankly. Sometimes I'm pretty impatient. Occasionally, like if I'm working on something that's kind of small that I want to get done in one go, but if I did it without some heat work, it might collapse or something. I'll give it a little blowtorch blast. Again, going back to our conversation about drying, I'm really anti-air gun, hair dryer, I guess, because air just dries off the surface and it will dry things really unevenly. I had mentioned that if you put a wet ball of clay into a kiln that's at 200 degrees, it'll start to sweat. So it really evenly pulls water from the substrate, like from within. Whereas air will just dry the outside. It's one reason why it's kind of bad to work in a studio with air conditioning, because there'll be such heavy airflow that you'll get really heavy drying on one side and not so much on the other, and problems ensue.
Great, now I have a good reason to blame the air conditioner for all my failures.
Perfect. Having a scapegoat is very important, that's for sure.
Max, I think you mentioned what type of a clay was that one, the piece that, the other piece?
Ooh, I can't quite remember what clay body that is. It might be the Solday 420, one of Toshiko's hand building clays. That was made at her studio, I guess in 2018 or something. And it's surfaced with micaceous pigments that are used on like chameleon cars and things like that. So it has a little metallic glitter to it. You can actually fire micaceous pigments. They're kind of lustrous, and there are actually some micaceous clay bodies you can get like nice glittery inclusions.
It's less groggy than the one you're working on.
Yeah, it's probably just as groggy, but the size of the granules are a lot smaller, so you don't get as much of the like grog tearing out. There are like some areas you can see the grog, like as I pulled it out with the sponge accidentally, and the sponge was too dry, so it was actually just ripping it out. But if I just keep it wet, yes, this just has larger grog than that other one, more like a brick. Let's see. Belly out that area too. And again, so the work is basically all there. You know, if I squish this down, it's gonna create some nice folds. Really do a final, just exaggerate the form, because when I compress it, it'll lose some of that definition. So again, I'll just start, you know, gently pressing down, being careful of where, really trying to centralize where my hand is applied, so that it squishes down on itself rather than just off to one side. And this, to be able to squish that bottom part, I may even have to weaken it some more so that it just has to fall. Maybe, yeah. So that area inside there is really thin. You can see I can just press it a little bit. That'll give me another resolution of wrinkle. Just like really go for it now.
If it were a tall piece, this one, how would you handle that? Like, would you handle all the building at one step and then doing the creases together, or do you build it and?
Great question. Some of those early flablets, I would literally just build like 2 or 3 coils at a time, squish them, and then let that set up, and then build another section. It is fairly difficult to, without having, fairly difficult to get like small wrinkles when you're so far away. When you're like pressing down on here, you see it's only moving the top. So building in sections is a good option.
And when you build the second section, like how do you like manage the lower one supports the top one and it doesn't get
Once I collapse these on themselves, they'll actually be fairly stable. They basically don't really have anywhere to go, and it's the same amount of clay as the wall. It's just sort of rearranged, but it's all, you know, clay is great under pressure and can withstand that. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like, let's see. And again, if an area is getting too thin, I can just take another glob of clay. This is kind of easier to do with hand building because the clay isn't wet and weak. I can just take a little patty and add it in. You know, I just like squish it in. Same deal as blending with the coils, just really make sure it's good and on there. Then I can take that and stretch it out some more. It'll probably fracture a fair amount on the outside, but that's okay. all of that is just cosmetic. Fix that right.
Matt, you have a few jars on Instagram. They look like these big monsters from, what was the name of this monster that they had in the Disney movies? Anyway, they look like big flabby jars. Is that a similar process that you use for those?
Probably. I have to admit, I'm not entirely sure what you're talking about.
I'll put the link. Hold on a second.
That'd be great. Or what color are they?
They have, they are brown with some metallic. I'll just put the link in the chat board.
Awesome. Yeah, that'd be great.
The wrinkle.
Max,
Hey there.
hi. I know you're very anti-water,
Well,
but in watching you these last few sessions, you use a lot of water.
I'm
With
very
your
wary
sponge.
of water.
Huh?
I'm very wary of water. I have to say, I mean, I'm definitely not anti-water. Although I apologize, I may have come off with that, calling it the enemy and the central villain and all that, which I don't regret. Just have to, yeah, really keep an eye on how much water you use. And that's, I mean, for hand building and for throwing on the wheel. Although one thing, like, I feel like hand builders should use more water, just consciously. Like throwers, I think, get a good trial by fire of like, okay, this is how much water I can use and I need to use less now. Whereas hand builders, it's easy even to get through the whole process without using any. Yeah.
But your sponge is pretty wet, isn't it? Do you sponge most things that you do by hand?
Not, well, in the cleanup, yeah. But some of those, like, I won't really touch it with water until they're bone dry. They'll just be ribbed relatively smooth. And then the extra smoothing is done with a wet sponge. The warping, it's definitely useful to have a sponge. You can just keep it clean, sort of throughout the process a little better. Actually, it is quite useful for this camera sometimes.
The bronze wrinkly glazed collapsed bottles that look like a blob.
Oh,
like
okay.
a little rim.
Those were built in a very similar fashion. Ruth, we're just getting back to you on the those were like a series of jugs that I made in Mendocino. I may have collapsed this a little too much, obscuring some of my wrinklage. Those were made in the same way, just sort of a different format, more round than rectangular. I'll show you guys. So the interior here, you can see, is also sort of flabulated. So, there's a fair amount of compression there. And now at this point, there's not a tremendous amount I can do with that same technique, but I can go in and sort of, belly out some areas, try and get some other curves. Kind of like there's a nice canyon there, but there's kind of a nice wrinkle in there too. So I'll try and just like squeeze that out. So it shows its face. And then from here, yeah. This is actually like pretty sturdy. I can start building on this. That's another nice thing about the groggy clay. It is really strong. Like even though I just totally weakened this thing and thinned it out and made it wet, I can probably coil like the same, like another 3 or 4 coils on this before I would even think about being worried. Yeah, water.
What's your philosophical take on symmetry and asymmetry?
Um,
Now pontificate.
I'm pro asymmetry for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm fine with both. A lot of my work definitely tends towards the asymmetric. Asymmetrical things are, definitely more dynamic. In a sense, I do feel like they're more realistic, more natural objects are, slightly asymmetric than perfectly symmetrical. It's kind of like a Platonic ideal or something with perfectly symmetrical objects. I don't know. It's a good question.
I think your work really is like the anthropomorphic qualities are like amplified by that asymmetry, or like the gesture or a little lean or tilt, and yeah, just it's obvious that you're utilizing that in a lot of ways.
Definitely, yeah. They're a little more accessible than some high-minded, perfect thing.
And I feel like it also helps like the volume element, the roundness and like the fullness of the forms in some instances.
It's interesting. Yeah, you kind of have to move around them a little bit to get a feel for them as well. Yeah, there's more room to be surprised with asymmetry.
So Max, is that still a butter dish?
Oh crap! Oh man, I feel really bad for my friend. I always forget. It could be.
I'm just wondering how you're going to cut the lid off.
Well, so I would probably just form a plateau up top here. Like I would close that area off, and he promised me he would use whatever I make him. That was in our contract. So I'm definitely gonna make him work for it. However
Are you going to slice it at the bottom then when you're done?
So my idea, let's just do it. Let's go for it. I would literally just coil this top closed, and then make a lid of some variety to contain his butter. None of this fancy French butter dish stuff with a water seal and whatnot. Just a nice.
No.
Yeah.
I mean, I think I would just cut it across the bottom.
Wait, I'm sorry. Cut it across the bottom?
And yeah, and then the bottom.
Nice.
Yes.
That's a good idea. I don't know. I'm going to torture him more and have like a big attention grabbing honking thing. This is a good way to show you guys how to close, or how I close off forms. Just doing the same. I'm just making sure these coils are tapering inward. And I can't really see the internal join lines, so I'm just trying to be extra careful and really work them. So just slowly tapering things in. We're getting there, but again, we do need a flat surface, hypothetically. Let's make sure it's going where I want it. And now that it's there and it's tapering in, I'm just going to start slowly taking it down. I'm trying to like use my finger perfectly level with the center of the earth and pressing it. pressing it in. And I'll take a paddle to this afterwards, but just focusing it a little bit. So again, while I'm attaching these, I'll keep them upwards, but tapering in. These are the areas where you really want to be careful about having the joins properly set in. Just simple motions with the blending, making sure you repeat them all over.
Would you ever just put a curved slab across the top?
I don't know why. I really don't use slabs. I don't know. I just don't trust them. I prefer to coil even flat surfaces like the bases. There's something about a homogeneous way of working where, if you use a slab roller, the particles will be arranged in a certain way. Whereas if you coil something, particles will be arranged in a certain way. I want them to be like intimately homogenized. I guess the short answer is no. I would usually, or always coil. So we're just working that smaller and smaller. And then I'm going to make a little like triangular insert there. Just like nestle it in, get some compression, and blend it. And that covers that whole area. And now I'm going to grab trusty Yixing paddle. Paddles are great. And you may be able to see it's not collapsing because it's a completely closed form, so it's like a balloon. Around this track. This would be a nice plateau. Yeah. Paddles are pretty fun to use, I have to say. So that air is causing some resistance on the inside, which is great. And now I would go in. I have to say I'm not too crazy about the slabs on this one, but maybe I can make them a little more pleasant. Just go around, do some cleanup, so I can get a better look at it. Sometimes when things are messy and haphazard, you just have to clean them up just to see what's actually going on behind all the fingerprints and the little scraps of clay. And this is where I'd start going in and carving some holes. Just doing some detail work. So maybe I'll try and emphasize that line where a flat surface becomes joins in with that other one. Just slowly take this edge and work it on another axis. Let's try not to cover. Here. Just taking that edge and slowly tapering it to meet with this sort of deep crease here. I'll go from the other direction and try and bring that out. And I like those sort of delicate moves where, taking a flat surface into a round surface. I want that transition to be gradual but dynamic. I might even build that edge up with another little clay addition as well. So we have a nice crisp. All right, we have about half an hour. I'm going to check on that piece we worked on at the beginning of class, or the end of the last class. We should be able to just work on it right here. We'll see. I'd say this one has a fair amount of work to be done, but horizontal flabs, closing stuff off, cleaning things up. Let's see.
I would tell them to put that stick of butter just right on the top there.
A butter plateau for now. We'll yeah. Get in the other half in a year or two. Got one. What are those great like Amish butter that comes in? It's like 4 pound, big rolls. It's good stuff. Needs a specific custom butter. I did make a lot of butter dishes in college. Some of my first like pottery installation work. I made a 4.5 foot standing butter dish, and then during the installation, I had butter on it with bright lights shining on it, and it melted the butter during the course of the installation. So there's like butter oozing off of the side of this 5 foot monolith. Like really slowly dripping off the floor. It's like this unctuous, indulgent butter moment. Anyway. So this might be a good teaching moment with blowtorch work, just because I really haven't been able to dote on this piece for the past couple of days. I've been in a cleaning frenzy. I know it may not look it, but
I noticed.
things are at least getting sparser. The deep chrome. So this is that piece that we made the other day, and it's been covered with 2 sheets of dry cleaning plastic with a single extra sheet on the very top, creating a seal on the inside and on the rim. So the top rim is actually still quite squishy. Well, I guess it's supple all around. Like I could probably still do some squeezing and squishing if I so desired. Maybe I'll take like a couple areas and just give them a little extra bump, a little extra bump, a little extra bump. And here, with the leather hard clay, well, not leather, but slightly more set up clay, it's really registering, my finger marks a little bit more evident. I'll just be careful, I'm trying to use that to my advantage. Anyhow, so I made an insert this morning, and I let it set up during the day. So I made this kind of a similar motion. The body is really wriggling and moving inward, compressing and collapsing in on itself. So I figured I'd just try and keep that going. And these, for those of you who are just tuning in, we demoed a bunch of different inserts. So all of the forming methods that were covered previously. just gonna grab a trim tool. So this you can see I made quite thick, so I'm just going to trim off some of that excess bottom edge. Frankly, it's a little too thick for that thin rim to support at the moment, so I want to make it easy for the shoulders. And again, you know, this
Can
whole.
you put your hands down kind of so they can see?
Let's see. Just trim those extra edges, and I can work it a little more. Again, the edge that I just cut from, you know, won't really be visible to anyone. So this is just a weight concern. On that note, I do want to flare the edges out so that you can't see them when you look in some of them. Just slowly take my finger and work on those edges. It's still pretty slopey in there as well. Just clean off my hands. Feel free, happy to be interrupted if anybody has questions about questions. Anything which I realize the hole here is fairly small, so I do want to probably do some extra compression so that this will actually fit in and get to the point that I want it to be, which is essentially where this rim ends.
Did you first create the cone and then manipulated all the folds inside?
Yes, yeah, and this one was fairly large. It was actually probably more cylindrical, and then more cylindrical with a lot more collapse than the usual sort of skinny cone inserts, because there's a lot of distortion there.
So you did it on the wheel and then you manipulated it. Mm-hmm.
Indeed, yeah, I manipulated it on the wheel as well. I just cut it off a couple of moments ago. So just doing a little extra compression in there. Pull those edges back. Cool, it's evocative. So general, just map it out again, make sure it fits. I think it's still fairly large, so you can either cut a hole in the rim here, try and belly it out a little without distorting. Without distorting the forms. Let's see what else. Yeah, I think we can go that. And this, we may have some structural issues since it is leaning forward, and that all that weight from the insert will be essentially doing that. We'll see what happens. Hopefully this isn't too exciting. We'll try and keep it at a reasonable level. I can also just flare out the rim if I need a little bit of extra space. And then once I get that bottom area in, I can flare it back in and then attach it. We'll start. I'm just gonna keep the clay off my hands so nice and clean. Even little bits of clay will dry out and then it might get scuffy. These smooth clays need to be treated like divas. So that's a little better. Now that I know sort of the direction, like that edge there needs to be pulled down to meet that gap. So I'll pull it off and sort of work that edge down manually. I do it like this so that I don't add unnecessary pressure and weaken the actual rim. There's a lot of excess rim here, which I'm keeping to help me join it properly. Let's see. That's a little better. Frankly, it looks pretty horrifying. It's great. I could try and, like this thing is pretty bodily and wriggling and a little unsettling. Maybe I could glaze it in like a nice pastel pink glaze or a pastel chartreuse or something, and have the color and surface sort of fight with what's going on in the form. So that, and there's that extra flange that I'll just trim off and compress off. I may just blowtorch it a teensy bit, just because I am getting a little nervous. I really kept this completely covered the whole time, so I'll just give it a teensy bit more structure. Yeah, you can see it's wiggling a little bit, so it's still a little too soft. If I had my druthers, I would probably leave this uncovered with the rim covered until later this evening, even like 3 or 4 hours, just so it really doesn't respond. Again, you don't need too much. Blowtorches really are pretty powerful. You can, if I put this real close, I'll end up scorching the surface, and the surface will get dry really quick. But if you just add some heat from far away, that's good. In the interest of time, I'll probably err on the lighter side.
It's hard to hear you, Max.
Whoop. Sorry. I probably didn't give too much information. Just being gentle. If you keep the blowtorch really close, you'll really scorch the surface, and it'll get bone dry really quick. Then if you note, like we talked about how it wicks moisture from the inside, you'll get the surface bone dry, like if I held it right there, but then if you pull away, water will precipitate to the surface and actually rehydrate it after a little bit. So just trying to be sparing, just a little bit. Maybe a little on the inside. Fire needs oxygen. So you can just blow in there, or if you do have a hair dryer, you can use both of them and get air in there to keep the flame going. If I just hold it in there, it goes out. That's lovely. Okay. That's a good one. I can reach in there. So just general, the same old joinery concepts. Lacerate both sides. I tend to use really thin metal ribs. They're always around. Yes. Yeah, lacerate these. I tend to just use metal ribs because there are usually 5 of them within arm's reach. And they do get nice and deep in there without distorting the form. It's actually quite heavy. I think I'm probably going to do some more trimming on this. Maybe we'll do the scratching first. There's a lot of like these areas where everything has been compressed. It's quite thick and unnecessarily thick. So I'm just going to go in there and do some trim. I'm trying to get it close up there. So you see, like where that crease meets, that's quite thick and really doesn't need to be since it's joined Won't really fold open. It's just one extra thick wall. So I'm getting in there and getting rid of that. If the insert is too heavy, it could even, just fall right through the form. It might make this lean forward. You might get cracking issues in the kiln. Like if you put a brick on top of a piece, just the weight when it weakens, when it's fired and pyroclastic. Those are some concerns I have. And I want to make sure, one thing that also happens, this area may be too heavy for this area to support. So I want to thin it out for that, because this is actually even more wet than the body right now. So it's much more liable to be problematic. And please do, if you have glaze questions, I'd love to get them in advance. As with anything, glazing is a serious rabbit hole, and a simple question about how do I get a chartreuse leads into like flux selection and colorants, and I don't know, everything just sort of dovetails into another topic. So if I get questions in advance, it'll help me from devolving into unnecessary gobbledygook.
I mean, frankly, Max, I'm trying to process how we take the information you're telling us about glazing to what we have access to at the community center.
I'm going to stay away from chemistry as much as possible.
Not just as a process. And I mean, Kayla, maybe you can answer that. I was kind of alluding to that with films earlier.
I missed the first part. Can you repeat that, please?
Yeah, I mean, how do we take the information that Max tells us about glazing into what's available at the community center?
He's not going to be teaching how to mix glazes, but more of the behavior of material and temperature and clay bodies. So it'll all be applicable, and you can even take it into consideration when you make your forms, because that's something that really, the materiality, or like the way the glaze behaves. Max is considering that when he's building his forms in a way. He's thinking about the surface from the beginning, and I think that's really an important takeaway.
I'm going to try and keep it pretty basic, like things that you would need to think about or would be helpful to think about when you go into the glaze room, like application thickness, and how that's determined by the thickness of the glaze or the thickness of your piece, or what temperature it's fisked at, or how you apply it, whether you're brushing it or spraying it, all that. A lot more like bare bones stuff than thinking about. I shouldn't have said flux selection. It's out there. If you want to learn about flux selection, Matt Katz.
Okay, I mean that makes sense, because basically how we take the glazes, and they're wonderful glazes that are available in the glaze barn, and make the best selection for the piece that we've made.
Yeah.
Okay.
And more.
Okay.
So Carla, may I ask you if that's something that you can do? I have no idea what glazes you guys have there. If we could get, for those of us that are not part of the center, just the name of the glazes, nothing else, no recipes, nada. the names of the glazes, and perhaps if you can tell us in terms of what you have available there, do you do oxidation and reduction? Do you have a soda can? What are all the choices that you guys have in terms of firing?
Well, we have gas reduction, we have raku, and we have electric, multiple temperatures of electric oxidation. So like O4, we don't provide a lot of glazes that we make at O4, but we do offer O4 firing. We have, you know, some standard studio glazes that you'll see around the country, like copper reds and celadons for cone 10, tomato red, temaku. Some that are less common, cone 6 glazes. You know, it's a random assortment of stuff that's sort of accumulated over the years. So some of it may sound familiar, and some of it's custom glazes that someone, you know, gave to us. So I could do, you know, we could go over that a little bit tomorrow. We have like 30 glazes at least. I don't even know. We have recycled glazes that's 100% post-consumer waste from the sink. We have blends of glazes, things that we discontinued that we just poured together, and we use those too. So we try not to throw anything away, and that's sort of crazy, but we have a lot. I think Max is going to talk a little bit about opacity and transparency, and that might be more applicable, is thinking about glazes in terms of their character versus the recipe or the name, like the types. Back to you, Max.
Yes, like why would you choose something over something else?